Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and welcome to today's discussion where we are responding to the various responses regarding the upcoming Expedition League and all of the changes that are coming in 3.15. If you are new to the channel, you can of course like, subscribe, and ding the bell to be notified about future video discussions just like this one all throughout the Expedition and 3.15 patch cycle. For today's discussion, we're going to be focusing, giving some responses and some feedbacks to two major groups that are out there. Shout out to everybody who participated in our poll the other day where we segmented kind of this sort of question about how players were feeling about 3.15 and the direction of Path of Exile in general after the announcement of Expedition League and the various changes that are coming alongside it with the release of 3.15. Anyway, thanks so much to everybody for participating, for giving comments, and for giving us some feedback. Today we're just going to basically boil things down into two groups. The group that is more frustrated with the direction of POE and the group that's more optimistic about the direction of POE. As always, if you've got thoughts about today's discussion while you're listening to and interacting with us, you can feel free to drop us a comment down below with any thoughts, disagreements, or simply frustrations that you might be feeling. And you can also say hello to our new dog. Here's Rex. Say hi, Rex. There you go. Good boy. Good boy. Who's good boy? Yeah, good boy. Good boy. All right, so the first group that we need to talk about today is the frustrated group. This group is frustrated for a lot of reasons. First off, maybe they're frustrated due to a game balance policy. Basically, these are a group of players who feel like with every new release and every new nerf cycle, as it were, that simply Path of Exile becomes more and more frustrating or discombobulated or even confusing to play. So this is all related to what used to be called the Nerf Hammer or the Nerf Cycle. It used to be a pretty well accepted meme or accepted perspective that grinding gear games, when they were patching things, would nerf things. That used to be the expectation and just the usual modus operandi of grinding gear games. Hey, there's an update coming out, then chances are stuff that's really powerful is going to get smacked, slammed, and nerfed. This group might also be frustrated to simply content overload. There's a lot of players at the moment who have complained about the style of content that has come out in Path of Exile over the last several years. And basically this group is maybe frustrated and not able to articulate it, but it might actually be because of burnout, that they've actually played so much Path of Exile over the last year to 2 years that maybe they're just burned out on the game. And so any sort of news whatsoever might be a source of frustration for them. There's a segment of this group that's frustrated because the game is too fast. There's a lot of players who have played Path of Exile or other action RPGs who would like for the game to be slowed down or toned down, whether that's due to the nature of currency gathering in Softcore Trade League, or maybe that's simply just the pace of play in general and players would like to see things move on their screen a bit slower. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you've also got players who are frustrated because the game is too slow or because the game is supposedly moving towards a sort of meta or a sort of pace that is slower than what it currently is. A lot of players have begun playing Path of Exile over the last couple of years, and no doubt the game Path of Exile has really picked up in its pace and in its speed overall over the last several years, whether it's tackling the 10x story campaign in faster methods or whether it's tackling endgame content in speedier, faster methods. Either way, the game has sped up, and so maybe some players are simply used to that and they see the game being too slow now as opposed to maybe what their peak zoom build used to be. Another segment of the frustrated group of players is due to monsters being too OP and players getting one shot. This is mostly, at least from my interactions with players, representative from players who are playing endgame content or players who are playing hardcore content. One-shotting in Path of Exile is something that is simply unpreventable. I mean, that's why it's one-shotting, right? A lot of the times players will say that there's skill involved in Path of Exile, and there absolutely is. Path of Exile is a hugely varied game based on player skill. This is why certain players always finish near the top of certain events and why other players finish nowhere close, because there is a skill gap. But that being said, there are such things as one-shots, and big-time, big-name players who play Path of Exile for a living still get hit with one-shots from time to time and still are on display for all of us to laugh at and meme about for getting one-shot. That's still a part of the game, and there is a segment of the player base that is very much still frustrated with monster health, with monster difficulty, and with getting one-shot in general. So when that segment of the player base hears grinding gear games say we feel like content is too easy, well, for a big segment of the population, that's pretty much like nails on a chalkboard. The last group of this frustrated segment of the players is due to monsters being too easy peasy for players to steamroll. While on the one hand, players can still get one shot even though they've got demigod style, versions of all of the best in slot gear, the reality is that some players get that gear incredibly fast and tackle almost all of the game's content within the first month of every single league. There's still a massive portion of the player base that doesn't do that, but there's a good size portion of the player base that is able to push for level 100 within the first few weeks of the league if that is their goal. And so some players are actually frustrated with Path of Exile right now because it is too easy, at least for their skill, for their knowledge base, and for their particular enjoyment of the game. Well, those are just 6 of the groups that I've identified and I've observed over the last several days since 3.15's announcement. Maybe I've missed out a group, so feel free to let me know down below. What's the crux of your frustration if you're in that frustrated camp? What exactly is the focal point? What about 3.15's release and announcement has made you frustrated with where Path of Exile is at in the moment? All right, the second group of players that I want to address today are the optimistic players. Players who are simply bounding with hope and who are rejoicing or just excited with 3.15's announcement and the trailer for Expedition League. Well, this optimistic group is optimistic due to a long track record at Grinding Gear Games of delivering exciting content with new leagues. Sure, there's misses here or there, but in general, most players who are optimistic after 3.15's announcement are optimistic because they've got a long track record that they've had a good time playing Path of Exile, and the content that's come out has been enjoyable, and so they expect 3.15 to be the same. Another segment of players that are optimistic because even though builds seem to always get nerfed and various ascendancies, various skill gems, various itemization, various archetypes get nerfed into oblivion and are no longer able to reach the previously achieved power levels, the reality is there's another build that will crop up and players will be able to play that. So some players are optimistic about 3.15, not because they're denying that the nerf hammer is coming, but they're recognizing that the nerf hammer comes and it's still okay. The game is still playable and still enjoyable. Another segment of these optimistic players are excited because they just have a fun time when playing POE. There's not some big meta, there's not some big discussion, there's not some trying to get in the minds of game developers and get on some sort of, mind track or mind meld with the developers and feel like, well, I really agree with and think philosophically about the direction of this game and the ideology of this game. Some players don't want to get into that headspace. Some players just sit down at their computer or their console, boot up Path of Exile, go kill some monsters, drop some gear, have a great time crafting gear, and then go away having had a great experience. God forbid, some players just have fun. Oh, Iron, you cannot have fun while you're playing Path of Exile. That is absolutely out of the possibility. Like, some players are optimistic because they just sit down, have a good time playing Path of Exile, and that's it. That's all the explanation or hope that's needed. The fourth group of optimistic players that I've identified as being optimistic are optimistic because of a comparison of Path of Exile versus other games on the market at the moment. So some players look at Path of Exile, see its development history, see its development timeline, see its communication patterns, its communication tendencies and policies with the community, and experience its gameplay, and then they compare that with the development, with the communication, and the gameplay of other competing games on the market and just go, wow, yeah, POE absolutely kicks everything else's ass, and so I'm going to enjoy some POE and I'm optimistic about where it's going. And a fifth group within this larger optimistic tent is the group that's simply excited because they saw the trailer, they see the balance changes, and they go, yeah, those balance changes are actually a good idea. And hey, Expedition League actually looks cool, and I can't wait to jump in there, figure out what's going on with these new endgame kind of bosses, figure out what's going on with these encounters, and try and figure out what's the best and most optimal way for me to have fun inside the experience that will be Expedition. Like, some players are just genuinely excited for the trailer and the changes. All right, so if you're in this group, if you're in the more optimistic group, what gives you hope about 3.15? What about the trailer or the announcement or any of the communications that Grinding Gear Games has released or said or comments or articles about 3.15? What exactly gives you hope moving forward? Is it any of the things that we've listed here, or is it something else that I've missed out on? All right, so I want to respond to both groups, both the group that's frustrated and the group that's hopeful. And I'll give you a couple of my thoughts here about things that are frustrating me in Path of Exile at the moment, as well as some things that are giving me hope. So if you're frustrated, I want to say a couple of things about that. First off, I've been frustrated too with Path of Exile. I've played Path of Exile as my main game basically for the last 6 years, and there have been moments that have frustrated me with Path of Exile's development. There have been communication patterns that have frustrated me. There have been whole patches and even multiple patches that have just absolutely frustrated me. There have been tendencies that have frustrated me. There have been decisions that have been made that have frustrated me. Even as recently as Ultimatum League. This isn't like, well, this is all ancient history, and so nothing is recent and everything's happy and fun and sunshine right now. There are things that are very recent that are frustrating to me. And yet at the same time, I want to encourage you, try 3.15 out, right? Before you get upset about anything, try 3.15 out, right? And here's why. There's often times where, nowadays, especially over the last 2 years, Grinding Gear Games promotional material and hype train and hype cycle around leagues do not necessarily reflect what the gameplay and the experience of the actual game is like when a league comes out. In other words, we think that a league is going to be A, and it turns out to be B, right? Our experience is supposedly going to be C, but actually it ends up being more like D or E, right? So oftentimes when players are frustrated based on trailers or based on patch notes or based on manifestos or just based about communication in general, but they haven't gotten to experience something, I try to double down and encourage players, hey, give it a shot. If it still frustrates you and it's not fun, don't play it. But if it is fun and is enjoyable, then maybe all of that frustration and pent-up anxiety that you had about something really didn't need to be pent-up anxiety and frustration, and maybe it just can be fun, right? Like, it's okay to play games and have fun. That's like the point of playing games, right? It's like having fun. It's okay to do that. So if you're frustrated, try 3.15 out. See if it frustrates you. See if the game is actually going in a direction that you fear it's going. And if it is, okay, then make some legitimate complaints on the forums. Here, leave me comments, leave Grinding Gear Game comments, and hope that they listen to you and move the game towards that direction. If 3.15, again, doesn't turn out to be this awful thing that you were worried about and it actually turns out being fun, well, cool. Then you don't have to worry about those fears and frustrations that you were originally worried about. If you are hopeful about 3.15, I've also got some words. I won't say they're words of wisdom, but some words for you as well. So there's some things about Path of Exile that give me hope. One of them is most notably and recently the Labyrinth change. That's been something that players have been asking for years, for the Labyrinth to get updated, for the Labyrinth to be essentially just taken a look at. Would GGG just take a look at the lab and make a couple of changes? And Grinding Gear Games did that. I don't hear anybody out there on Reddit, the forums, YouTube, Discord, anybody saying, hey, look at this. This was something that we asked for years, and they actually did it. Like all of the conversation about the lab actually being updated, that's all gone, right? It's not popular. It's that iron. Iron. That's so 3 or 4 or 6 or 8 or 12 months ago. Okay, that's fine, but it's something that Grinding Gear Games did, right? They listened to the player base. They said this is a legitimate thing that we want to change, and I didn't think the lab was going to get touched until POE 2. I was really worried that POE 2 was kind of where we were all putting all of our hopes for everything. And the lab update really gave me some hope for the direction of Path of Exile. Not just that we're pinning all of our hopes on POE 2, but that Grinding Gear Games is taking seriously the feedback from players and the sentiments from players about the direction of the game in the meanwhile, not just punting everything towards POE 2. So that gives me some serious hope. If you're in that camp and you're hopeful about Path of Exile moving forward and about 3.15, I do want to temper your expectations a little bit. Sort of like how I just warned everybody who was frustrated, like, hey, maybe you don't need to be frustrated because maybe Expedition League turns out to be awesome and epic and it's not actually the thing that you're afraid of. I do want to warn you the same way. Maybe you're hopeful about Expedition League and 3.15 and a particular skill gem that looks absolutely 2 thumbs up, balls to the walls, amazing in the trailer. A lot of the time, skill gems don't end up being awesome during the first league that they start out. Generally speaking, Grinding Gear Games releases about 3 gems, 3 new skill gems every league, and 1 out of every 3 is good, 1 out of every 3 is ho-hum and not really that exciting, and 1 out of every 3 just ends up being... Now, that's just on release. That's not for the life cycle of the entire gem. although there are some gems out there that are still just begging for reworks and wishing that somebody would play them. But the point is that sometimes things aren't as great as they seem. And so if you're really excited about the trailer, I do just hope you temper your expectations a little bit, because again, sometimes the game that we experience isn't what we hoped for with the trailer. For me, most recently, that was Heist League. I thought Heist League was going to be one thing. I was very excited for it. I was excited for this whole stealth aspect of gameplay to return to Path of Exile. I saw it kind of as an iteration on darkness farming, what we used to have with Delve. And then within the first 2 days of the league, everything was killed that was related to actually interacting with Heist in a sneaky, stealthy way. And it just became a Zoom league that happened to have some doors in your way. My point by bringing up Heist isn't to complain about Heist. My point is sometimes a league will release one way and maybe you enjoy it, and then the developers decide to take it a different direction and you enjoy it less. I hope that all of us can enjoy 3.15 and also communicate our frustrations about the things that frustrate us or upset us about 3.15. I hope that none of us get too high or too low, either with our frustration or with our hope about 3.15, but we can kind of chill in like some sort of happy medium where, hey, we're honest and we're forthright with Grinding Gear Games, telling them and communicating these are things that frustrate us, and also telling them and communicating, hey, these are things that are awesome and we hope you do more of these things in the future. Lastly, don't flame Grinding Gear Games. There's no point to flaming Grinding Gear Games. If you go beyond frustrated to just being cynical and you think everything that GGG does is terrible, then the game has stopped being fun for you. Stop playing it and stop complaining and shouting and making a scene about it. If the game's not fun for you anymore, maybe it's not fun for you anymore and move on. But if you're frustrated with the game, then you're probably frustrated because there's something about it that you still really enjoy and you want to see it improved upon and maybe built upon even. So communicate that to the developers. Give some feedback. Give even helpful critiques. Don't just say, hey, this is what sucks, but then maybe also offer some suggestions. Who knows? You never know. It might just actually end up being implemented. Players were complaining about the Labyrinth for years, and a lot of changes got implemented for the Labyrinth that players were complaining about. Doesn't mean that everything's going to get listened to by GGG, but they've got a long track record of listening, responding, and then developing in light of community feedback. So I want to encourage us all to communicate our hopes and our frustrations with the upcoming 3.15 cycle. Well, thanks so much for joining us for today's discussion and for watching. I'd love to know down below in the comments if you're more optimistic about POE's direction moving forward in 3.15, or if you're more frustrated, and what exactly is frustrating you about the announcement and the various releases that are coming out with 3.15 and Expedition League. Thanks so much again for watching, and I hope the upcoming League 3.15 Expedition is the league that a Mirror of Calandra drops for you. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.